How are you
Can you hear
doing,
me
David?
okay?
Hey, Corinne.
Doing well, staying busy, that's for sure. Trying to get
All right,
graduation
yeah.
completed.
What are you doing for graduation, Dave?
We have surveys out right now to our parents and our students and the senior class. We solicited a bunch of feedback over the last couple of weeks. It kind of evolved into 2 specific plans based on their feedback, and neither is perfect.
Really?
I'm sure. The one fact we're going to be able to maintain is that not everybody's going to be happy. And so
Yeah.
surveys are out. We're getting data. We'll look to have it still on June 13th. It'll be a live in-person graduation. The difference will be it's either going to be 411 graduates on the field with no parents or spectators, or 5 sessions of 80 students, all socially distanced, of course, with masks and such, with 4 family members per. So for our medical partners, it was really about the number of people in one area, even though it's an expansive area. That's the key. And so we're getting feedback, and there is definitely a pattern emerging, one over the other, which we're really happy to see. So we should have some information early next week.
I see Concord has divided their graduation up into 3 sections. They're going to have 3 different graduations because evidently their school is divided up into like 3 different pods, and they're going to take each pod differently. I mean, the same graduation, but at different times to try to engage both, I think, both parents and students.
Yeah.
So patterns are emerging. So
It's,
I think Seacoast Charter rented out a drive-in movie theater.
that's not a bad idea.
Everybody's there, but it's
Yeah.
still on screen.
That's what Lakes Region Community College is going to do for their graduation. Some of our other graduations have been virtual, but they
Yeah.
want to do it in person.
How many are they talking about, Susan?
Usually they graduate around 250, so
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure.
Great.
So they've got some pretty big parking lots around them, and they've been working actually with a local manufacturer, so they may very well go there instead.
Good.
Well, it looks like there's 4 folks listening in. 11 of us.
Yeah, I know Mary had a fiscal committee meeting or finance committee meeting, so she said she may be a little bit late.
And I have
So
an appointment at 4:30, so I'm good for about another hour and 25 minutes. But I suspect we may be done by then.
Yeah, I think we will.
Okay. And I'm in the same boat as David. I will be leaving at 4:15 for another Zoom meeting.
Mhm.
And Dr.
let's-
Ewart,
let's-
I haven't had the chance to congratulate you on your appointment to interim chancellor. So congratulations. We haven't had the opportunity.
Thank you, David. I think it's momentary or temporary insanity on my part, but
You might like it.
yeah, no, this is, I flunked retirement, so this is my 12-month plan to improve my retirement plan and do the good things I should do for the system. So yeah, there's no chance after that.
Hey, Rick. Your audio is not coming through.
We're seeing your mouth move.
Yeah. Good video, but no audio's not.
There's the other half of the Ladd family.
Now we know who provides tech support.
Right.
I was just going to point out the tech expert over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go, Rick. All right.
Hey, this is my second computer. The first one wasn't working.
Well, you're still logged on the
You're still
first
logged
one.
on the first one.
Yeah, I know. My wife's turning it off for me.
Okay.
She'll get it off upstairs. And I'm alone now.
So have we heard from Chris yet, Dave, do you know, or John?
Chris is not going to be able to make this meeting. She tuned in this morning. for the conversation then, and try
This is
to-
John Morgan. John, I'm on.
Yep.
I'm mobile at the moment, so I'm going to be listening until I can get onto my laptop.
Great, okay.
Okay, real good, John. And I'm not sure about John Beardmore. I know his schedule's been pretty crazy, so I think we just go ahead and get started whenever you're ready, Mel. Who are we waiting? Who's still to come on?
Well, that was John on the phone, right?
I
No,
think
that was John Morgan. Just he's with us here.
Oh, okay.
We've got everybody from engagement.
All right, great. So we're missing Beardmore, and I know, and Mary said might be late, and Chris I know can't make it. So
All right.
I think we're good on this end.
All right, so let's call the meeting to order. And
Is
thank you.
everybody in, Jordan?
yeah, we're good.
Okay.
All right, so we set to go. All right, so let's take a roll call here. Obviously, this meeting is going to be recorded and will be posted on the Commission's website. But let's make sure that those persons who are listening, if they have questions, that they can direct those to the work group via the Commission's website. And there's no opportunity for public input on this particular phone call. So let's do the who's here for the record. I'm Mel Myler in my home office in Kentucky. David Luno.
Yeah, Dave Luno, reporting from Hopkinton, and just Ozzy, the long-haired dachshund.
Dave Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Dave Ryan in my office at 30 Linden in Exeter, and I am alone.
Dick Ames.
Dick Ames, I'm in Jeffrey, and I'm alone.
Susan Hurd.
Susan Hewitt in Hooksett with a black cat who may cross the screen at some point.
Okay. Connie Casadin. Corrine.
Corrine Cascadden. I'm in my home office in Berlin. Nobody
Rick-
here.
Rick Ladd.
We're glad I'm here and in Haverhill.
John Morgan.
John Morgan, I am in my car in Exeter, but I will be home as soon as I can be.
Okay, those are the members of the work group, but we also have
And Dick
participating.
Ames.
No, we did, man.
We did.
Oh,
we
you
did
got
Dick Ames, yeah.
all right, sorry.
And we also have other people who are also helping the work group. Bruce Mallory.
Hi, Bruce is here, calling in from Cary Point, Maine. I'm alone in my office.
Jordan.
Jordan Hensley here in Dover, just me in the room here.
Michelle.
Michelle Holt Shannon, and from Dover, it's me and my dog Archie.
Okay. Jen.
Jen Poor in Concord. I'm just trying to stay quiet because my neighbor is running a very loud leaf blower.
Okay, good. All right. So thank you very much. So let's look a little bit at the group arrangements that agreements that we've had for our work together as a commission. First, listen first, be open-minded. It's okay to disagree. Accept working through conflict to its resolution as a catalyst for learning. It's okay to put issues like race and class on the table. Be purposeful and to the point. Notice if you are conveying what you're conveying is or is not pertinent to be heard on the topic. Take risks, be raggedy, make some mistakes, then let it go. And we all share the responsibility for the group productivity. Do we have the minutes of the engagements last work group, Michelle?
You know what, we do, and I'm realizing as you say that they did not go out with the update today.
That's okay. Just keep those and we'll double it up for the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I think one of the things that we wanted to deal with, David, with the Fiscal Policy Committee was it's not on this agenda, but I thought we were supposed to deal with the scope of work for the air for our outside consultants. I think we should deal with that first.
Yeah, that's fine. And you know, I sort of thought that was going to be the you know, the take two at the statement of work following our first cut earlier this week. And I thought that was going to happen in all the work groups. Really, there was very little time at the end of the adequacy work group to really really get very far into it. But Bruce made some comments about what Jesse's over at AIR is doing with it right now, and I think we had a couple other comments. But Bruce, do you want to sort of tell everybody where we are with the scope of work and the sort of, you know, what generally came out of adequacy this morning?
Sure. So we've been operating under a principle that Chris Dwyer expressed, I think at the end of last week, as we were talking with the AIR team, and we were looking at their proposed scope of work. We began to make some revisions and edits on the scope of work that AIR submitted based on our RFP. And of course, we selected AIR because we thought that their approach to our scope of work outlined in the RFP was the strongest and the best fit for us. Chris urged us not to take too much license with modifying their proposed scope of work, because in fact it is, you know, they're the experts. We're contracting with them, we're hiring them, and so let's not tell them what to do any more than necessary. So that was kind of a guiding principle for us, I think, as we've worked through this. The executive team had a phone call with the AIR team this past Tuesday, and we'll be doing that on a weekly basis for about an hour as we, you know, for constant status reports and, you know, checking in terms of progress that we're making. The one area that we did feel that we wanted the AIR folks to more explicitly identify in the scope of work is emerged as really a core issue for us at this stage of the process. And that is, of course, affirming a definition of adequacy, building on what already exists, assessing the degree to which that definition from 2008 is still relevant or may need some rethinking, potentially some expansion. And we need to do that in order for the AIR folks to know how to model all the costs that go into what we've been calling the adequacy bucket. And of course, they'll be running a range of models depending on what we, the commission, decides goes into that adequacy bucket. So we had a conversation with AIR about that on Tuesday, and they are now making some revisions to their proposed scope of work to reflect more explicitly their serving as a resource to the commission as we define adequacy. We're not asking for AIR to define it. That's our responsibility, commission's responsibility. But they will give us some comparative information from other states, how other states have conceptualized and defined adequacy, and how other states have costed adequacy as well. So that's really the one change that we're looking for, and we expect to see that revised scope of work either later today or certainly by tomorrow. The rest of the scope of work that AIR proposed was completely lined up with the RFP that we had released and addressed those items that they're best suited, you know, to carry out, which is essentially a cost modeling approach, figuring out what, you know, how to determine the costs necessary to achieve particular outcomes. Now, a reminder that the AIR methodology is focused on outcomes. And so the way that we'll try to understand better disparities across communities and within communities in terms of the student experience is looking at what the resources are that go into local school district budgets and students' education to produce certain kinds of outcomes on the other end. So that's the rest, as I say, the rest of the scope of work, I think, reflected our needs, and it was really a conversation about that one particular point that's quite important to us going forward. So I'll stop there. Dave, you may have other comments.
Yeah, no, I think that was right on, Bruce. The only things that I would add, and you know, Dick, this was something you brought up during one of our very, very, very early proposal review team meetings, was that AIR actually had the statute in their proposal, so they know what our statutory charge is for the commission. This week, when we spoke with them on Tuesday, we provided them with the work group tasks. So now they know how that charge breaks down into work group tasks and what our work groups intend to do. So they know the things that they need to do to support the what we all need to do. And I guess the only thing I'd have to add on the adequacy part is, as Bruce was saying, and as it's laid out in the scope of work, they're really focusing on outcomes and identifying disparities that lead to a more I guess compatible outcomes or comparable outcomes across the state, and applying weights to these various disparities. And I guess when we think about about the inputs to an adequate education and the costs, and we think about the disparities that we have across districts, there could be some overlap there. And we need to make sure that we're not sort of double counting things. So one of the things I'm just using this as an example, but Rick, you brought up transportation. In fact, it came up with the school business officers this morning too. I mean, it's a big thing that is that is not in the addressed in the current formula, but it may have an element related to sparsity or district density or something like that. It may be captured in a weight on a disparity, but it could also be put into adequacy. We just got to know where these things are, so that they're not so that they're accounted for properly, I guess. Is that fair, Bruce? Bruce, you're muted.
Sometimes my space bar works to cancel a mute, and sometimes it doesn't.
I've never been able to use my space bar to do that. I tried it after you mentioned it last time. It doesn't do anything on mine.
So anyway, yes, what you said was right.
Dave?
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering what your understanding of or expectation for AIR's work on revenue, on the revenue side of this question, what they might be doing for us, and sources of revenue. That if we end up with a larger recognized obligation for the state, or maybe redistributed obligation, whatever. What are they going to do for us on this?
Right. So they do talk about revenue and sort of tax policy. They're not taking on tax policy, but they are going to look at how things are funded right now and how things could be funded to provide a more vertical equity and a sort of a fiscal neutrality that we don't have right now. And so they would sort of show where things are out of balance right now. But I think it would really be up to us to provide those final revenue models.
Right.
And so they'll say, look, you can't have, and I'm I'm not looking at the tax tables right now, but you can't have Berlin, and maybe they won't say this, but they could say this. You can't have Berlin paying $40 per thousand and Newcastle paying $4 per thousand.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're going to point out those sorts of things and maybe suggest some.
So I think that's what I assumed, and I think that says that we have to keep thinking about what we need to
right.
Do to augment our capacity to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could just add to that, Dick, I'm reading from their draft scope of work. So once they have modeled the costs based on our definition of adequacy, and once they've made cross-state comparisons, done an equity analysis, then they're going to what they call modeling recommended options. So we'll show how the funding of adequacy could be supported under different scenarios of revenue generation. This will consist of an Excel workbook that will show how funding distributions across districts would change under the recommendations, and also how expected tax burdens would need to change in order to support the recommended funding scenario. Specifically, the simulator will allow users to change certain parameters to understand how funding and tax burden changes under differing assumptions.
Yep.
So yeah, they're not going to get into the policy side of things about fiscal policy per se, but they're going to show us, they're going to give us a tool that will allow us to enter different assumptions about revenue sources and mix of revenue based on the cost funding.
Yeah, I think that's solid.
So Mel, any other?
What do you need from us as it relates to what both you and Bruce have just said?
I think we need to. We're going to get AIR's revisions based on the conversation we had on Tuesday. Bruce, we can send that out to the commission members and then have that, any comments, get that collected, get those back to Bruce. But we're really looking to have final language ready for Tuesday next week. So because right now our biggest enemy is time. So
you don't need anything from us today then?
I mean, unless you've got specific comments, but I think what we're saying is while we had really robust discussion on Monday about the statement of work, it was good, it was exciting. We were throwing different stuff around. We were sort of testing different things on there that we're sort of coming back to ground here, and making a few minor changes to the statement of work, but that AIR, I mean the AIR they are experts. I mean, and the other group we were working with too are experts in this area, and they know what we're charged to do. They know what we need to do. They know the time we need to complete it in, and they're showing us a path to get there. So.
Just one more thing I'll say in terms of looking at their scope of work now, because I think we're going to transition into the engagement conversation in a minute, but wanted to remind us that one of the deliverables by no later than June 19th, they say, they're writing, I know that Bruce Baker's already started this, they're writing multiple briefs that provide background on various methods used to analyze disparities in educational opportunities and outcomes. These are supposed to be user-friendly, meaning sort of public-friendly, short 2 to 3 page briefs. I think Baker said something about a 5-page one that he was working on. But in general, these are supposed to help policymakers as well as the general public understand how we arrive at the different options that we're going to get at as we analyze disparities around educational opportunity and outcomes. So we'll see those in at least the first of them, I think within the next couple of weeks. Those will be really useful information tools, particularly as we go beyond the focus group part of the engagement process out into other audiences that may be less experienced, less familiar with the nuances of how we fund our schools.
Good.
Just want to have the minutes reflect. John Beardmore's joined us. Hey, John.
John, welcome, John.
Very well.
Okay, so are we ready? Are we ready to segue into the engagement part of this program?
Mel, I think that's fine. I've only got one other item that I want to talk about for fiscal policy, and we can do that after you're done with engagement. And it should only take a couple minutes.
Well, why don't you do this? Why don't you deal with that, and then those that want to get off from the physical engagement part of the work group, we can then focus on the just those of us that are on the engagement.
Okay.
Why don't you do your two quick things?
Okay, that'd be great. So I just wanted to sort of go back to our task list, and I think we can start knocking off some of these things. Our first two tasks. The first task is identify all current revenue sources, local, state, federal grants for PK-12 education. And Rick, I was wondering if you could take that.
Define that a little bit more, Dave, please.
No, it's how you identify all current revenue sources.
Well, that's not a problem right there.
It's not. I just want to make sure it's all there, and particularly, you know, I think it probably gets more complicated when, at least in my head, when you start looking at federal and grants. But I think, given your experience in administration, you probably have a good handle on that.
Yeah, I can work on that. Of course, I'd also work closely with Caitlin on it as well.
Yeah. Just as an FYI, Caitlin is absolutely out straight. I tried getting a meeting with her this morning, and her next block of availability isn't until late next week. So,
yeah, we need to be careful how we approach her, because I think
waited with bated breath.
Mel, you're breaking up here. Yeah.
I don't think we can have individuals on here. Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Better.
Okay. I was just saying, I think we need to be careful of having some kind of a coordinated contact point in dealing with Caitlin, because the last thing she needs is to have 16 members of a commission going after her for information. So David, I'm not sure as the chair how you might want to deal with that, because obviously one of the things we need to link up fairly soon, I would think, is some kind of a conversation with the department on exactly where we are and what some of the needs are going to be from both the commission and from AIR, because they're going to be asked, they're going to be needing some of their information. So I think there needs to be a point person that's going to be able to shovel, or not shovel, but to make these requests of not just Caitlin, but other members of the department too.
Right. So I have actually had this conversation with Caitlin, and because she's very conscious of the needs of the commission, but also recognizes her limited availability at the time. So I mentioned this morning to adequacy and put on the table here. But I know a lot of us are going to be interested in getting information to accomplish our tasks. Please run the information up through work group chair. Work group chair will bring it to Bruce, or you can go directly to Bruce with it too. I mean, but I think the best way for it is just sort of, Rick, if you've got some specific things that we need to get from either the Department of Ed or DRA, and specific questions that we need asked, if you could email it to me and Bruce, then we can get that to Caitlin. We'll probably pack it together with some other information requests too, so that so that it's organized.
Yeah, you might, Dave. You might want to send a note out to the commission members.
Yeah,
with what you just did, with a copy to Caitlin, so everything kind of knows you know, what's going on and what the point person is, et cetera. Because we're going to have other issues at the department. I mean, we're going to go after transportation or building aid, et cetera. There are going to be other members other than Caitlin that are going to be dealing with this out of the department.
Right, right. But also similarly with revenue administration.
Exactly,
and
right, yeah.
maybe with reaching higher, and maybe with
Yeah.
Doug Hall, and we just want to be organized in that approach so that they don't see it coming from everyone.
See, Dave, this is a huge problem. Let's take transportation. And I dug into that, you know, back a while when we were on the task force. And there were a lot of issues. We've seen transportation costs, as far as the state share, decline significantly versus what the state was contributing back in 2008, 2009. We're now down to roughly around 40%, where we one time, if you took the mountain-based adequacy, up around 60%.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a decline there. When we're trying to find out exactly what we're using these monies for and what is incorporated under this transportation umbrella, there was no contact at DOE for that information that we could find. Where we were getting that information from was from the directors of transportation in the various school districts. So I think another source of getting this information, and I have a number of transportation questions. In fact, I sent a couple to Jordan earlier this afternoon. I think we're going to have do some contacting directly to school districts too, to try to get some samplings in rural, urban areas and find out, you know, what is comprising these costs, and why are they higher one location than another location? We don't have all those answers yet.
Right, right. And some of that information, I would need to go back at the DOE, go back to the DOE 25. But that's pretty comprehensive and may capture some of that stuff. And I know there's requests out right now, again, going through Bruce to the department for the comprehensive data set, all districts from the DOE 25. So that's going to be very useful, I think, for a lot of different cost categories. But you know, but I know what you're saying, that
well, like in transportation, are you looking for costs which support field trips, which is a lot of that's locally, some of it comes out of the Pepsi machine or the Coke machine.
Right.
So
yeah, and I don't know how granular that is on the DOE, but you're right.
I know my Coke revenues were above $20,000 a year coming in, and they paid for a hunk of travel. So that's another local source of revenue.
Right. But that should show that revenue should be shown coming in as a grant on the revenue side, and then as an expense on the transportation side. I mean, as transportation on the expense side of that.
Well, we'll work on this, and I'll work with Bruce on that, and yourself and Mel.
Yeah, and there's no question we're gonna need to have representatives from state agencies meet with work groups and commissions as we have these questions and need to explore things deeper, because in some cases the data may not have been pulled together yet, and we'll just have to see what availability we might have. But as far as what we're talking about in this first task, identifying all current revenue sources, local, state, federal grants for pre-K-12 education. Yeah, I mean, I think if you could put together an information request on that, then we can and email that to me, Bruce. We can get that out. But it's basically drafting the information request.
Okay.
That would be great. So the second task, I think,
I have a question on that last one. Sorry.
Yeah, Dick.
The identify all revenue sources. So one of them is
current revenue sources.
Current revenue sources. Okay. So one component of that is the state aid, and one subcomponent of that is adequacy. But the adequacy money comes from a number of different sources. So is that part of what we're looking for?
I think that's exactly what it's looking for, that some of it comes from general fund, some of it comes from dedicated revenues that drop into the education trust fund.
But yeah, but I guess I was getting to, okay, coming into the education trust fund, take that one, is this amount from what is it, from the
Lottery list.
Meals and rooms tax, and this amount from the business tax, and this amount from lottery, and whatever else there is, plus some slopping over from the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. And that should be, I think that's going to be interesting, particularly what we're going through right now, where a lot of revenue sources have been compromised. And Dick, you know more about that than, any of us being, on Ways and Means. So, yeah, so that's what we're talking about there. The second task I was actually hoping to assign to you, Dick.
Oh boy.
So, which it's one that you and I have talked about before, which is identify changes in level and mix of those revenue sources from 1999 to 2020.
Right.
And I think we've got a start on that already from some work that Doug Hall's completed, and I think it's a spreadsheet I sent to you.
Yes.
But I was wondering if that would be something that you could take on.
Yes.
I'll
try.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, but that would be great, and that way we're starting to knock off some of these tasks as we have this nice long weekend coming up. I'm just kidding. I don't mean that you need to use more of it. So that's all I had. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to move to the engagement work group tasks that we have. And those of you that are on the fiscal policy, feel free to stick on. But on the other,
any other thoughts from fiscal policy members? You certainly stay with us here, or if you've got other stuff that you need to do. But anything that you want to add to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with just assigned out, Dave, but I didn't make the adequacy meeting this morning. And in looking at our costs, are we getting down to the point where we're starting to, because time's running out, to try and identify what is core adequacy, what is core knowledge, what is transportation? Is it field trips, co-curricular activities? Is it as vocational education, CTE, special education, to and from school in the morning and night? There's a lot of issues there, and I just was looking at the transportation costs again. Our actual costs right now for transportation is right around $838 per pupil.
Mm-hmm.
We started that out with actual costs in 2008 around $568, of which $315 was base adequacy. Base adequacy now is only $334.
Right.
And so it's a significant reduction, and the gap is getting larger and larger.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to really define what we are going to include as adequacy so we can start capturing our revenue sources that are necessary to support that.
Mm-hmm. And Jay is starting that effort right now to define what is in the adequacy basket.
yeah, Dick.
Yeah, I just, Rick, this morning, it was a really good session. They had the 3 business managers, school business managers, who were fantastic, and 3 or 4, maybe 4 special ed administrators. And they were granular. They're getting down to the basics. And I'd say that the summary of it is the adequacy work group is really beginning to dig in to exactly what you're looking at, and what are the components of what came up today that really have to be part of that adequacy and the cost of adequacy that the state picks up and what are not. But of course, today was take in information, but my expectation is that Jay is heading down a pathway that will analyze that.
But we need to move on that quickly.
We need to move on everything quickly.
No, unfortunately so, yeah.
Yeah.
Dave, you
Okay,
good?
so I would certainly, I'll raise it again, that I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in the discussion on adequacy or what goes into the basket and what that work group is looking at, what's in, what's out, how our outcome's going to be factored in, that you should definitely look to jump into those work group meetings as well. All of these meetings are posted as if they're full commission meetings from the standpoint of public notice and meeting the public meeting laws. So definitely jump in if you want to.
Okay, let's move on to the engagement thing, part of the agenda. And I'm going to turn part of this over to Michelle.
Sounds good.
She's got some
Mel, your internet connection's not good.
charts that she might want to. It's not.
We're having a hard time hearing you, but I think you're tossing it to me. So
Yeah.
stop me if I go in the wrong direction here.
Mel, if you turn off your video, you're probably going to have better audio. Yeah, why don't you take it, Michelle?
Okay, hopefully it'll come back and clear up for you, Mel. All right, good. So the thing that I want us to look at is I want to walk us through an audit for the participation of various stakeholders. We start in June with focus groups, and then we'll have essentially rolling engagement for the rest of this project. And so there are a few places where I have questions for you, and I want to walk through where we were identifying who are we reaching with which sort of event, and then if I can get your sign off on the invitation that we're going to send. I'm hoping to push the buttons on Tuesday to send out to the target groups for the June focus groups. So we're looking at the I think it's a 4 or 5 page document that I sent out this morning, and there are a couple of changes. So I just want to get your input on those. So I'll walk you through it, but feel free to stop me and just ask clarifying questions as we go. Okay.
Are you going to put that up on the screen, the chart?
Yeah, I can. I didn't think about that. Okay. All right, so this first piece, can you see it okay? Is it a okay size?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the first thing I did is I took the brainstorm list that you all have come up with in terms of various kinds of stakeholders, and then I added in the far right column where I see is one of the primary places where people can participate with some of the engagement activities that we'll list below. And also just clarified when we say varied demographics, for the most part, we're talking about age, race, income, sex, religion, and political differences. So the first group is more of a broad group. And so from there, the June focus groups, the stakeholder online focus groups that we're about to start, will primarily reach select board, mayors, school board representatives, town and city leaders, and school leaders and business folks who have been, pretty directly navigating a budget. And that is the focus for June. So we'll come back to that. We realized in doing this audit that there really was, even though educators might wear a couple of these hats and show up at some of the other engagement opportunities, we decided to propose adding an educator survey, so a survey that's targeted to educators. Students of various demographics, including recent alumni, are primarily reached with the Intergenerational Student and Family Voice event and the online education funding modules, which I'll talk more about. Let me pause and just say that right now, for sort of the two ways that we can share information with people to try and help make something, really complex a little more accessible, there's the briefs that AIR will be writing, and there's the education funding modules that Reaching Higher are creating. And those are two right now sources of information. So I want you all to weigh in on that as well. With families and parents, the Intergenerational Student and Family Voice event is a primary opportunity. There's a lot of different groups that were listed, nonprofit groups, advocacy groups and organizations, foundations. And of those groups, I think they'll be kind of, accessing a mix of these opportunities. We expect some of those people will be in the June focus groups, the survey from the UNH Survey Center, the Intergenerational Student and Family Voice Summit, targeted surveys, and statewide online conversations. And then also, again, using the online educational funding modules and having surveys for folks who participate in those. Business leaders, primarily we see, hopefully we'll be targeting business leaders in the statewide online conversation, even though, again, there'll be overlap in other places. And then one of the places where we want to make sure we're reaching older adults and folks who don't have kids in New Hampshire schools is the Intergenerational Summit and the statewide online conversation, and with the educational funding modules. So that was just a grid for me to kind of, it is what it is, like an audit to see who are we capturing where, and are there any big gaps? So if you look below, there's a little more detail on what each of those interventions are. The thing that I want to point out is the stakeholder online focus groups. We've already talked about the survey with UNH Survey Center. We've already talked about. I mentioned last time, but have decided to alter, for your input, the Intergenerational Student and Family Voice Summit. Right now, this is the primary in-person opportunity that we are really hoping to pull off in person. If we have to, I'm confident that we can adapt it online, but it means recruiting basically 3 affinity groups: families, students, and older adults in that community where, in that area. And the design has people in their affinity group for part of the time and mixed with everyone for part of the time. Again, I think I'll want your input on do we use the briefs, and in what way? You know, are they accessible enough? We don't know yet. Do we use the modules that Reaching Higher is creating? Those are supposed to be very accessible for students. They're going to use them as well, but they want everyone to use them, and I'm sure they'll report out to the commission on what they find as well. As I mentioned before, a new is the Educator Targeted Survey. And then with the statewide conversations, we're going to invest in that in-person time with the intergenerational groups. And so I think the statewide conversations could be online and mixed across the state again. And that might, I'm suggesting we don't need 9 at that point. And I want your input on that. And then finally, using the online education funding models. I think we're going to hear from Reaching Higher, how they use them with students. And we are talking about how we could use them, again, with New Hampshire residents who don't have K-12 children. Maybe reaching out to retirement communities or with other community-based organizations in our outreach with New Hampshire Listens. So I'm going to pause there because that's really kind of an adjustment based on kind of the current time, but also making sure we're getting a mix. And so I want to pause and just get your input on that as the flow of interventions starting in June and really running through early October.
Questions of Michelle? Michelle, scroll up to the top of the, there you go. Okay, thank you.
To get you back to this part?
Yeah.
Okay.
Michelle,
Go ahead, Susan. Yeah.
if your question's up the top, Mel, let's ask yours first because mine is down further.
Okay. Are we missing anybody in this audit here? Seems to me that's pretty complete.
I would have something in the area of business.
What's that? What's that, Rick?
One of the areas that really is affected by education is the real estate market, realtors.
Yeah.
And when I was trying to sell one of the homes I have up here, the reason why I had 3 people at the time wanting to buy the house. They all rejected it, not because of the house, but because of the 2 reasons: property taxes, and 2, the level of education in town. Yeah. So there is a direct relationship, I believe, and I hope maybe there isn't, but that with the quality of education, does the value of with the quality of education, does the value of property go up? I know that's the case in Monroe, where people want to go there because they know, well, we can send our kids off to St. Johnsbury Academy and the town pays for it. Same thing in Piermont. So I'd like to see some kind of a survey of realtors to find out, what are all the issues that impact their market, selling, purchasing, etc. The other one that I would like to bring up under business is not quite business, it is government, but when I was graduated from OCS, one of my fellows in the down at Fort Sill was General Barrett, and he was the Deputy Adjutant General for the state of New Hampshire. And when I met with him, he was praising education in the state from the standpoint that the kids that came from New Hampshire were much better prepared when it came to technology and technology skills than they could find elsewhere in the country. And so talking with our recruiters, Army, Navy, Air Force, talking with the National Guard, is there anything we could get back from them in regard to, are we preparing our kids properly? Are there some areas we might improve upon, etc.? It's always worth a crack. So those 2 areas which I didn't see it anywhere in the list here, but we also use where the kids stand on the ASVAB as one of the indicators, one of the inputs for adequacy. that's a result of ESSA. And so, so maybe we should follow that up too. How are our kids doing on the ASVAB? I don't know. It's something that's what we put into it a year ago and we haven't seen the results yet.
Good suggestions. Other suggestions on the audit? Okay, Michelle, let's go down to scroll down a little bit.
Susan, was this?
My question, you've made the decision to go from the 9 groups to 5. That was a big conversation for us in terms of ensuring that we hit all of the regions. I'm curious as to, how you're going to meet that need to hit all the regions. Are you thinking in terms of some of these groups that you're proposing are in particular locations so those folks have an opportunity? Or just because of the plethora of places and opportunities people have, 5 sounds like a reasonable, number of groups at that point in the process.
The 9 regions will get covered in the Intergenerational Student and Family Voice Summit, and that's the piece that we hope to be in person. And so, as an in-person opportunity, it will naturally be more place-based.
Mm-hmm.
With the community, the statewide conversations, if we do those online, they don't need to be place-based. And so I was suggesting that if we, put that number a little lower and made it up in some other areas, like with the in-person time, which I think will be a pretty big investment, that would give us the mix that we needed. You're also sort of trying to mix the times when people's feedback is as a type of, like as an educator, or as a business person, versus the times when we try and get people to mix. And if we do the online conversations statewide, people, someone in Pittsburgh could be in a group with someone in Portsmouth. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's, it enriches the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Because
I there's thought behind it.
Yeah, because sometimes, I like that, because sometimes you don't have many conversations between a Rye and a Berlin, for example, people who are engaged in those communities. And you're right, that might be a very rich conversation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Anything else on just that initial audit? I've got 2 other things that I want you to look at, and that's just outreach by region and the invitation for the June focus groups.
Let's look at the output for June and then go to the invitation.
Okay. So I think this outreach by region is it kind of is about everything that we do outreach for, in the sense that even for June we'll probably send invitations through some of the professional statewide organizations like school administrators and that kind of thing, because we're trying to reach those people who've been, working with the budgets and the, school boards association. So we'll do sort of this broader piece that's kind of trying to reach that group, but we'll also always sort of give it this look of a slice around the regional planning commissions, of which there are 9, which we agreed to last time. And then within that, the towns that I have listed here under those regional planning commissions are just to make sure that we have a robust mix of size of town, of just a max mix, economic difference, rural, suburban, urban. And then the other thing that you'll see in this list as I scroll is, if it's bolded, that's a school who's signed on to their party to the lawsuit. So some of these aren't, and some of these are. And so we were just trying to kind of, I would say this is our slice at a max mix. So I'm going to scroll those for you, and I'm also going to read them out for folks who are listening, and then just interested in your thoughts. We're not inviting people who live in other places. The invitations for different parts of these will probably come in a variety of ways, but we are trying to hold ourselves to a mix in the outreach. So that's the purpose of this list. Is that clear? Okay. Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission area has Concord, Pittsfield, and Hooksett. Lakes region has Laconia, Franklin, Belmont, and it includes Winnisquam. Nashua has Nashua, Hudson, Salem, and Milford. North Country Council has Berlin, Androscoggin Valley, Gorham, Milan. Oh, there's my dog. Randolph, Errol, Shelburne, Dummer, Littleton, Haverhill, Lancaster, Franconia, and Colebrook.
There's one community there in that mix that you might want to consider, Lincoln, Woodstock area. I was over there just yesterday picking up some bikes at Rogers Ski and Sport and several other sporting. They have been nailed by the COVID and the loss of business. And Lincoln, Woodstock, yeah, is a community which is going to give us a little twist. We think of it, oh, it's Loon Mountain, wonderful place to live, but I would say over half that population is hurting in terms of revenue and income.
Rockingham Planning Commission, Portsmouth, Hampton, Seabrook, and Rye. Southern New Hampshire Planning, Manchester, Bedford, Merrimack, Goffstown, Ware, Derry, Londonderry, Hillsborough. Southwest Regional Planning Commission, Cheshire counties, Keene, Swansea, Hinsdale, and Winchester. Stratford Regional Planning Commission, Dover, Somersworth, and Rochester. And Upper Valley, Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, Claremont, Newport, Lebanon, and Hanover. And I have that list at the bottom of all of the towns that were party because I needed it for reference.
One of the questions I would have is the Upper Valley. Claremont, Newport, Lebanon, and Hanover are relatively similar in size. You don't have a small group there. I would recommend adding Sunapee to that group.
It's not so much the max mix in any one region, it's max mix across the regions.
Right, true, yeah. So you're saying here, this list, the invitations would go to representatives within these communities?
Yes, not exclusively, but it's what we'll kind of hold ourselves to in terms of getting coverage.
And so just to be clear, you're asking, well, as when we look at the invitation list, you're inviting people to choose respective times that they might be able to engage, correct?
Right.
And so, the invitation from Concord, who gets that, they may say, well, I'm available on X date, which at the same time, somebody from Nashua might be involved in that conversation. Is that correct?
That's true for most things, except for the place-based, intergenerational
right.
family voice.
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. So that mix is going to be interesting because you're going to have cross planning group participation.
True.
I like that.
Yep. It's yeah. So some of the interventions are intentionally a good mix, and some of them, like the survey of educators, obviously we'll be hearing from educators.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions regarding the outreach that will take place in June?
So Mel, I just got a couple of questions on it. I guess one of the things that we we learned in the past couple of years was that there was sometimes a rough, I guess, interface between students graduating high school in New Hampshire and entering community colleges. And I think it was generally surrounded around math. But I was wondering, do we have? Is there anything built into this that would help to include that? Because that's clearly, I think, the community colleges, particularly, where we are right now in workforce development, are going to play a major role in the higher education.
Dave, you might want to talk to Beth Dorian over at the.
Well, we've got Susan right here, so.
Yeah, Beth is on the advisory committee for career technical education.
Yeah. Yep.
She was also the one that did the Math Communities program, where we found out, 60% of our kids are going off to community college that are not, proficient in having to take remediation in mathematics, of which those that have to do that, we found 75% never graduated.
Right.
So that's where a lot of that initial stuff on the mathematics and also the dual concurrent enrollment came from.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I remember we worked really closely with Beth on the Public Higher Education Study Committee too. She was very involved.
Well, she's a very key personality in this whole mix.
Yeah. So I guess that would be one thing I want to make sure that we're addressing. And then the other one is, and and I'm sure it's in here, it just didn't jump off at me, and this is sort of the first time but the public charters.
So now there is not a plan to pull public charters out separately and sort of reach out to them as educators or reach out to them as students and families.
I just want to make sure that they're included in the.
They can be okay, but they would be in yeah.
Yeah, and I was just double checking our the statute, and the statute refers to all public schools in New Hampshire. So I want to make sure that we're making sure that we're covering that.
That's where Lisa Lavoie comes in, North Country Charter. Personality.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking too, Rick, because I saw a reference to North Country, but it wasn't North Country Charter, it was the North Country Council.
North Country Charter, yeah, that's the regional planning board.
Right. So, but I was thinking the same thing about North Country Charter.
Okay, all right, that's good to know, and it's good to just write it in here so that we make sure we're hitting those. Susan, did you want to say anything about community college students? I mean, the one thing that I will say is that, and it really depends on a partner on the ground who is able to follow through. If we aren't able to get to everywhere, which I guess we can't, but I'm really interested and optimistic and about using the modules and the briefs, but the modules created by Reaching Higher, the briefs created by AIR. I think we're going to be working on a discussion guide to use with the modules. And if we target certain groups, like if community college students, looked at the modules and had a conversation together, we could survey them on their thinking. So it's all about just making some choices about how we spend our time, and also making sure we have some partners who can help us make something like that happen.
Yeah, early on when we were talking about groups, I was suggesting something that would appeal to some of the community college students, whether it was going to the veteran students groups or the student senators or just open sessions where students could comment. I mean, we've had good luck in the last few years asking particular classes like a political science class or an anthropology class to comment on a local issue and solicit feedback in that way. So that won't be a difficult thing to do.
Okay. All right, great. Okay. Anything else on this audit? And then I can take us to the invitation.
Are you doing any kind of an audit or inquiry from the CTE directors? And I know Val is on that advisory committee with Dave Doherty, myself, and Bruce Farr. We have Bruce Farr. We have a number of wonderful contributors there on that CTE advisory commission. And we usually have a full house. Beth's on that too. Dorian's on that as well. Usually when we meet, every month, or now it was every month, but now it's, it's been strung out. We usually can have about 30 people there. Very active group. Might be worth saying, okay, how are we faring in terms of grades 10, 11, and 12 in career technical, because we just lowered it down to 10th grade and Manchester down to 9th grade upwards. And we hear that we're hollering for folks coming out of the CTE centers, and they have questions too in regard to why can't they be teaching some of the basic adequacy type courses at the CTE center rather than having to, do it in the regular high school. So there are a lot of issues that we might, strengthen our, our collection information by engaging them as well.
Okay, that's good. And that's easy on the front end of a survey to, I mean, certainly they're invited to some of these other things, but at least on the educator survey, we can ask people kind of what hats they wear and include a CTE drop down.
You already have a ready-made group put together with those folks that are on the CTE advisory commission. I just use them.
Yep.
Michelle, if I could interject here, and this comment is not about CTE directors per se, but one of the hats that I'm wearing as I listen to this and I'm taking notes today is managing the overall budget that CARSI has to work with, and our contract between CARSI and the commission. It was based on a scope of work that, we made up before we knew what we were getting into. So just a word of caution about us overpromising in terms of the scope of this engagement effort, simply because of the costs and our capacity. So that's not to say that these are not excellent suggestions for groups who need input from. And what I want to just put out there for consideration as we go along is, when does the commission as a whole, or do our work groups, need to have direct testimony, as it were, from some of the folks on this list? So we can take CTE directors as an example. Just as this morning when the adequacy work group heard from 3 special education directors from diverse school districts, 3 school board officers, school business officers from diverse districts. That was a very powerful, very effective, in each case about 45 minutes of input and discussion with sort of lots of minutes being taken and ideas for things that we need to pay attention to as a commission. So there may be efficient ways to get the kind of input that we're looking for from all of these different stakeholders, and some we might want to sort of prioritize in terms of direct input to the commission beyond the kinds of community-based and online focus group work that we're doing. So just, I think I'll be watching to make sure that we don't exceed our capacity in terms of both our budget and just our person hours we have available to this.
Good point. Good point. Jen, let's move to the invitation letter.
All right. And I believe I sent this to you too.
Yep.
Essentially, we were going to cascade this out through organizations and you know, partners and contacts that we have. This is something that we don't want to have, you know, anyone and everyone registering for, because we really are trying to target folks on the front end of this process who are pretty familiar with the acronyms and the process and the budgeting and that type of thing. But when folks register for these, there's going to be 12 different focus groups, 3 different times of day on 4 different days. And folks from anywhere in the state, you know, who wear those hats as school board, you know, school leaders, budget officers, town council, those folks. That's the group that we're really targeting for this.
And these names are going to be generated by their respective interest group?
So, you know, we have a list of folks. In fact, Bruce might chime in here a little bit as well, but School Boards Association, municipal associations, the list of budget officers. So we have a list of kind of stakeholders that I know Bruce and a few others met with on the beginning of this process. Those are examples of the groups that we would send this invitation out to. And you know, we're certainly seeking people who are currently sitting on school boards and you know, town councils, but also people who've served before. So.
If I could just jump in really quick.
Yeah.
The opening line, "Dear friend of public education."
Yep.
I think that could be perceived as political in some circles. And
Yep.
there are absolutely some people who would not consider themselves to be friends of public education, even in high-ranking spots in government. So I think that might be something that we may want to think about.
Yeah. Easy to change.
You could put
I
something.
agree. I saw that too. John, thanks.
Well, and frankly, the fact is, if we're going to be successful, we want the input of people who don't consider themselves, you know.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yeah, and just following up where they've been there, on your second paragraph there where you're saying as public school or community leader, granted there's going to be a number of people on school boards that respond, and municipal association, etc. But we're going to have hopefully people responding from preschools, which are not necessarily public. They're schools. They're funded privately. So, you know, as a school or community leader, I don't know why we have to necessarily put public. Now, I'm an advocate of public schools, yes, but I'm also an advocate of options available that we should have for all our students. When something doesn't work, there should be another choice. So it sounds like it is going to one direction. I'd like to see it just aimed at everybody in our state. Let's get the information and find out what's going on or what they have to offer.
Just a reminder, Rick, that these focus groups in June are intended to be to get input from people that are most directly affected by our current funding formula and what goes into the adequacy bucket. Where does your money come from? What's the mix? How do you use it? How do you apply it in your school districts? The other kinds of engagement activities that we have absolutely will capture people outside of that immediate community of folks that worry about where the money's coming from and where it's going out within their local communities. Not to exclude preschool or other folks who have a direct hand in local public education. And again, back to Dave's comment earlier about what the charge is, to this commission to focus on public education, broadly defined. So that in any case, what we really want to get in this first round of stakeholder input is what's your everyday reality as you grapple with building budgets at the local level, allocating those budgets, predicting where the money's going to come from on an annual basis, the impact of raising local property taxes on your community and on your schools, that kind of thing.
But I think, Rick, if the word public is removed in that particular place, does that address?
Well, I don't get hung up by the word public, believe me. So, but I was just thinking that up here, we don't have any public preschool. They're all privates, unless they send them across to Vermont where they do have public preschool education.
No, we have public preschool. Pre-K?
Yeah, but it's run through a grant program, probably
Right.
like Title I, and it's only open to so many students. You
Right.
oftentimes have to have a wait list, or
50-50 balance or 50-50.
50-50 split.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that there are some concerns there. We've oftentimes talked about, I've heard in discussion already today, we're talking pre-K through 12. But are we going to get that information out from that young parent as well? That's the preschool parent age, or do we, because they rely upon revenue that comes in from the federal government as well via the state. Some of these pre-K programs, like Piermont has the only reason why they can keep their kindergarten going is that they have pre-K coming in. But there's also just up the road a ways, a private pre-K that they're in competition with. And it subtracts from what they have in that lower grade to facilitate and maintain their program. A lot of consequences. They're looking at possibly having to eliminate some of the grade levels in that school and tuition them out to a larger school like a Haverhill. It's just a thought. As a school or a community leader, you play a critical role in advancing high quality educational policies. That way it could be sent to everybody.
Rick, I think that's a good point. And particularly if we're gonna, I don't know how far we're gonna get with solutions at pre-K, but I think we should start to understand that problem and make recommendations for sure. But certainly other states are looking at models where they're contracting with private pre-K services to make sure that they're providing access to pre-K in their communities. And so I think probably taking the word public out, you're suggesting that reaches in particular to that group of service providers.
Yeah. It doesn't limit.
Yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts about the text here, and I'm particularly want to make sure it's conveying that and we can, maybe one of the things we need to do is say that there'll be other ways to participate. Does it say strongly enough that this particular opportunity in June is for folks who have that direct knowledge of managing fiscal and adequacy responsibilities?
Yeah, you might want to add at the end of the paragraph something to that effect, Michelle. Because I think you do express that in this paragraph, but I think your point is well taken, that there will be other opportunities to engage. And you might want to mention in the adequacy conversation, physical policy issues later on in the year.
Okay.
I have another observation that was triggered by the discussion about as a public school or not, and just undefined as a school or community leader. The other place where there's a significant interface with private schools is special education.
Yeah.
And we just this morning heard a lot about that. So I wonder if, I guess that raises the question, do you have elsewhere as a group that will have, whose input will be solicited, the private school, special ed school community? And yeah. So just raising the question.
Yep. I'll look and make sure, I'll check our lists of if networks that we would be reaching out to would include that.
Yeah. I mean, you'll get it through Able, New Hampshire and that kind of thing. But the Cratchit Mountain School is a big time residential provider. And then there are day programs of all sorts, I imagine.
Okay.
Up here, we got Beckett School, which is huge. Private, doing special ed.
Okay, are we ready to go on to look at some of the questions that we might want to be asking in these initial groups with knowledgeable people? Do you have that list there, Michelle?
Yep. And actually, I think what we didn't get additional questions.
No.
And so what I think I will do for our next meeting is pull out questions from the current list that seem to be aligned with this particular group and run it by you and see, does that feel like it's a good fit? Did anyone have any other questions they wanted to make sure that we added to the overall list that you weren't able to send to us yet?
I don't think so. I think if they had them, they would have been forwarded to us. So.
Okay.
Because one of the questions we might want to deal with is to look at that list is to seek input from the commission members who have been working on the various other work groups to see if we have captured the essence of the questions that these knowledgeable people that we're going to be asking for the first round, whether we have the right questions there to ask them. We obviously are going to have to hone in on some of those questions because all those questions aren't going to be able to be asked in 60 to 90 minutes. So we need to basically look at some thematic kinds of questions that would cover the various topics that we're interested in getting from them. And I do think that the commission members themselves, based upon the conversations that have already taken place in the work groups, and review those questions, may be able to embellish or focus a little bit more on the key 5 or 6 questions that we want to elicit input from those groups. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think of the order. So you've got the larger list that you all created and that New Hampshire Listens sort of brainstormed. We could try and theme those or kind of group them for this group to look at, and then you want to bring those to the commission.
Yeah.
Larger commission. Okay.
Yeah. Because I'm just conscious that those sessions in June are coming up right on us, and so we need to finalize the inquiries that we're going to be trying to seek from these groups.
Yep. And we'll also have to kind of go with where we're at the time with any of the definitions that are being used. Although for the most part, because this is on the front end, and these are people who have worked with the budgets, our primary focus, I think, will be what's been your experience and what do you want the commissioners to know?
Yeah.
And we'll ask that kind of question a couple different ways. But let me pull the question list together a little differently, because you've looked at it this way a couple of times, and I think that's a task that I need to.
One of the questions we haven't really dealt with, though, Michelle, is who will be facilitating these sessions?
I assumed it would be New Hampshire Listen staff who are trained facilitators.
Okay, good. Okay, so members of those trained facilitators will basically be processing those 12 engagements.
Right.
That was my assumption, but I just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, and we'll probably have somebody facilitating and somebody kind of taking care of notes and technology.
Great. Okay. All right. Okay, questions from those of us that are left here regarding the invitation, where we're going with the questions, anything else? Dave, you have anything to add? You're still muted, Dave.
No, I'm good. I just checked my notes. I think we're good.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Anything else for the good of the order? All right, folks. Hey, listen, have a good, safe, fun weekend. It looks like it's going to be awesome.
Enjoy it.
Okay, enjoy it. Thanks, guys.
Great.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Michelle.
Bye
Thank
now.
you, Michelle, for your work.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.